All right, 8:38, Andrew Crocker, political science instructor at OTC, joins us the first Thursday of every month. How in the world did we get to June already, Andrew Crocker?
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm glad we're here.
Crazy.
I'm all relaxed, casual. Summer's
School's
here.
done?
Yeah, well, summer school started up.
Okay.
But online summer school. So I get to be a little more creative with my garb.
Very nice.
Although I was like, I did catch some heat for some fashion-related heat recently. After the governor resigned last week, I was on the local news answering a couple questions about the resignation. And I wore a tan suit. You're a stylish American, Steve.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with a tan suit?
I got no problem with that.
I got a lot of flack for wearing a tan suit. Apparently, that's something you should only do if you're looking to be like fancy casual.
Oh,
Come on
give
now.
it up, people.
I'll let you know. It's a radio show. But I was fantastic in that tan suit. I looked great
sure. I'm sure you were.
I don't know. The summer, though, has been kind to the Crocker family. So hopefully it's been to yours as well, Steve.
It has, very much so. So the subject of pardons, the Constitution speaks to a lot of things. You and I have had this conversation before. You can kind of liken it to the Bible. It was written at one point in time in our country's history, or our nation's history, world history. And now we have things come up that, boy, how did they have the foresight then to know we were going to deal with this today? So what does the Constitution tell us about pardons?
Let me start off with the actual language.
Okay.
Article 2, Section 2. Article 2, Section 2 has a whole list of the usual laundry list of powers and stuff you can and can't do. But relevant to our discussion, it says the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So a couple things about that stand out immediately. Mostly what's not in that. Mm-hmm. And what's not in that is any exception. It is a blanket power that we have given the president. Now, it's a little bit different because, again, we just fought a revolutionary war. We've declared independence. We don't want a new king. But there's a difference. A king can pardon anybody for any reason. He could pardon his cousins for parking in handicap spots, whatever. Presidents can only pardon federal stuff. They can't pardon statewide stuff. They can't pardon for local offenses. They can only pardon for federal offenses. So it's a little bit of a step down from a king. But he doesn't have to clear it with a judge. He doesn't have to clear it with Congress. He doesn't have to clear it with anybody. Matter of fact, the president can just issue a pardon and never have to explain it. Nothing in the Constitution requires him to.
Wow.
So it is a blanket power given to the president. Now, that could carry with it certain risks, obviously.
Sure.
You don't want a president pardoning every murderer or rapist in the country.
Right.
That would be possibly literal suicide in addition to political suicide.
Mm-hmm.
But it was granted to him, and it has no explanation behind this in the Constitution, but fortunately we have something called the Federalist Papers. Now, maybe you know this, Steve.
Yeah.
The Federalist Papers, written by some of the Founding Fathers, are like 80-some articles explaining why these provisions exist. Federalist Paper number 74 talks about the pardon.
Okay.
And it's described as a tool of mercy, a strategic tool of mercy by Alexander Hamilton. Here's the basic idea. If you have a rebellion stirring up, this is the actual example Hamilton gives. Mm-hmm. If you have a rebellion stirring up, the president can go up to the folks in the rebellion and say, "We're going to crush you guys. But if you step down now, you put down your arms, I'll pardon the relevant parties here, and we don't have to worry about any bloodshed. Just be clear, you will be on the losing side of this bloodshed." And this was in response to, did you ever hear about Shays' Rebellion,
No.
Steve? Shays' Rebellion was a bunch of angry farmers in Massachusetts prior to the Constitution.
Okay.
After independence, so it was under something called the Articles of Confederation. A bunch of angry farmers almost stormed the National Armory until we surrounded them and killed them all. And so we as a nation had to take a real long look in the mirror. And Alexander Hamilton said in 74, wouldn't it be great if we could give the president this tool that he can wield quickly, because as you know, Congress is very slow.
Yeah, right.
President is one person and can be very fast. That's why we give him foreign policy powers.
Mm-hmm.
We will give him the ability to react to events in real time, quickly, swiftly, to save lives and potentially in some cases to save the country. Sure enough, Constitution gets passed. Fast forward about 7 years after the Constitution gets passed, now we have another rebellion called the Whiskey Rebellion.
I hadn't heard of that one either.
According to that name, we raised taxes on whiskey. A bunch of farmers, this time in Pennsylvania, I think, got really, really mad and stormed the countryside. And they were tarring and feathering tax collectors. Like, it got really intense for a while.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but this is under the Constitution now. And the Constitution gave President Washington the ability to pardon. And he marched a bunch of troops out, just like Federalist Paper 74 said he could. He marched 13,000 troops out, essentially said, we're going to burn you guys to the ground unless you step down. And if we can, we'll pardon the relevant parties. The Whiskey Rebellion never took off. They did, in fact, step down. A couple of them were pardoned by Washington, and they came out and they extolled the virtues of the Federalist government structure. So right there, you turn a negative into a positive.
Right.
And it was designed to be a strategic act of mercy.
Okay.
That brings us into the controversies that we deal with our current president, especially when he starts talking about, can I pardon myself? Which, by the way, can we just talk for a second about how strange this president is with his pardons? Did you catch the pardon that he made a couple days ago?
Yeah.
Following a meeting that he had with a reality television star, right? That's so bizarre. Now, I actually read about that person. Sounds to me like they kind of deserve to be pardoned. Kind of agreed with the pardon.
From everything I've read, I would agree.
Just the methodology of having a Kardashian meet with you to sell you on that.
Bizarre.
It's the most bizarre thing in the world.
Yeah.
So our president comes out and he says, I have the absolute power to pardon. Completely true. Absolutely true. There are no restrictions.
Himself?
He says he can pardon himself. So that's where the controversy becomes.
Okay.
Because the Constitution, you can make a convincing argument for and against the impeachment of, the pardoning of the president pardoning himself. So let me start off with the one that we're all accustomed to. The president shouldn't be able to do this. We have a natural law in this country, and the natural law may not be written in the Constitution, but we wake up every morning, we brush our teeth and drive to work under the assumption that no man or woman is above the law. That's what we base we base our society on that. And if we allow the president to carve out an exception for him or herself, we seem to be violating that. The phrase in the Constitution, again, is that the president can grant reprieves and pardons. And granting implies that you have two people. I can't grant myself a kidney, but I can grant you,
right?
So you need a grantee and a grantor. And
I'm with you.
So there is an implication. Now, that's not clearly stating it, but that's the implication there. In addition to that, the Supreme Court over and over again has said that you cannot be the judge in your own case. If you're pardoning yourself,
that's
you
what you're
pretty
doing.
much are.
Right.
So the argument that I think most people would cling to, the common sense argument, is that the president should be able to pardon himself. However, that's where stuff gets weird, because you could argue the opposite case, and in my opinion, very convincingly. At the very end of this clause, it says the president can't pardon in cases of impeachment. So,
which is where this is headed.
Which is where it could be headed.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of get into why that's important. But that last clause, as we'll see here in just a second, could be the key to President Trump being allowed to pardon himself. We'll talk about that when we return.
Could be allowed.
Could be allowed. Very possible.
Wow, okay. That's a twist. I didn't see that coming. 847, the KICK Morning Show, presented by Priority Pest Control. 887-9322, online at PriorityPestControl.net. We'll be right back with Andrew Crocker, political science instructor at OTC.
If it's in the news and you're thinking about it, we're talking about it. The KICK Morning Show with Steve Largent. 92.3 KICK.
It's presented by Priority Pest Control, 887-9322. They are online at PriorityPestControl.net. Don't forget, coming up Monday, we're going to give away a free mosquito treatment courtesy of Priority Pest Control. That's a $59 value. So if you're having issues with mosquitoes, you can call 887-9322, get them out there and take care of it right now, or you can wait for Monday, see if you win a free one, and go from there. That liner right there, if it's in the news and you're thinking about it, we're probably talking about it. That's pretty apropos for this conversation right here, because all over the news, President Trump has been talking about this whole pardon issue, saying he can I have the absolute right to pardon myself. Here to help us separate fact from fiction, Andrew Crocker, political science instructor with OTC, did a very good job in the first segment laying out what the Constitution says. And now we have a little bit of a twist, lining up what President Trump says against the Constitution.
I think so. Again, I think it's very, if we're just operating by common sense, which, let's be clear, the Constitution doesn't give a flip about common sense, right? Because it has its own set of standards. Whatever you think is common sense, the Constitution's marching to its own drum. And so common sense would seem to dictate that the president shouldn't be allowed to pardon himself. But again, the phrase is saying that the president has the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. Period. Full stop. There is one exception carved out, and the exception is except in cases of impeachment. The founders had the ability to write an exception to that, and they did, but they only wrote it for impeachment. There is no exception written into the Constitution to the pardon power saying that the president's ability to grant pardons is restricted from himself. That's not in the Constitution. I think you could argue it's implied,
right? But
so long as it's not specifically in there, I think you could make the argument. So therefore, you could ask somebody might ask, well, if the president can pardon himself, then he can get away with anything. Not necessarily. Argue these people. Not necessarily, because, again, the president is subject to the power of impeachment over which he's powerless. So if the president pardons himself, the House of Representatives, which is in charge of impeachment, could deem that he acted improperly. I think most of us would probably agree if the president pardoned himself, that's improper. But if that happened, he can still be impeached, and then the Senate can debate about removing him. So maybe the resolution with the president, because he or she is the president, should be entirely political through the impeachment process and not legal through criminal law or whatever. And as a result, you could argue that the Constitution is actually protecting the president from the consequences of criminal law by virtue of being the president. This has some precedent. The Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon to protect him.
Right.
From criminal proceedings. We kind of understand it in our DNA here in America. The president could mess up royally, do a really lousy job, but at the end of the day, we expect them to vacate the office. We don't necessarily expect the president to serve behind bars. This person was voted for by tens of millions of Americans, represents at least half of America, legally, constitutionally represents all of America. So to a certain extent, because the Constitution does not carve out an exception for the president, you could argue that the president can, in fact, pardon himself. So it then becomes a debate, because the first segment, we talked about the history. The pardon was designed to be a tool of mercy, a strategic mercy. And just pardoning yourself for stuff you've done wrong doesn't seem to be that. So if you look at the context of history, that would seem to be against the spirit of the pardon power.
Doesn't line up.
However, if you just look at the text, I think you've got yourself a case for the president.
Here's what's really interesting to me. This is all much ado about nothing at this point. He's not been convicted of anything. There's no crime. So the fact that he's been able to make this such a discussion, such a focal point, and the fact that we're sitting here talking about it this morning when there's nothing to pardon him over. This is all what if the Russia conspiracy proves true. So that's not there. That said, we'll go back to the Bible again. The Bible does not say, for example, thou shalt not watcheth soapeth opereth. Soap operas. Okay? But it does say whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is pure, whatever is, goes through a long list of things. Think on these things. So you have that to line up against things you should or shouldn't do. Okay? The Constitution, as you've just accurately described, same kind of thing. It lays out some things, but maybe not specific enough to this situation. I wonder if implied in there is the understanding that the President of the United States would have enough common sense and decency and wouldn't go against the grain of, I mean, do they really have to say you can't pardon yourself? Surely the President of the United States would understand that's not the proper thing to do. But they weren't counting on Donald Trump being president.
Right. As a matter of fact,
Is that fair?
if you read Federalist number 74, Alexander Hamilton describes a thoughtful individual who is making very careful, cautious considerations with the pardon power, not somebody who's looking to stretch it as far as they'll go.
Yeah.
That's hardly unusual, though. Presidents often face down constitutional issues all the time. They're like toddlers. They like to see how far they can push the line before the courts come down and slap them. You've had that with every president in history. This one is just particularly salacious because it goes against something
Uber toddler.
Because this is just so salacious because it goes against something you and I have just ingrained into our soul, which is that no man is above the law. Yeah. Let me do you one better, because you said this is much ado about nothing. I agree for a slightly different reason.
Okay.
I actually think if the president pardons himself, it's not the game changer that it would imply. Because if the president can't pardon himself, and let's say Mueller comes out with a bunch of accusations saying Trump crossed the line here, here, and here, he gets impeached and removed. Mike Pence becomes president. What's the first thing Mike Pence does when he becomes president?
He's got to select somebody.
He does. What's he going to do with President Trump, though?
Pardon him.
That's the first thing he's going to do. Like Gerald Ford, right? He's going to pardon him. So under that scenario, you've got an impeached president who's not going to be put on trial. Now, if the president pardons himself, he's not going to be put on trial, but he is still subject to be impeached, which would probably happen if he did so. So under both scenarios, you've got yourself an impeached and potentially removed president who's not going to have to face criminal charges or face time behind jail. So to a certain extent, it's kind of the clever thing about the Constitution is that while the president can tinker with the legal system through the power of the pardon, the power of impeachment, the political check on the president, is very real and very much there.
I wish we had another hour. I think we could have some more conversation about this. But unfortunately, Brian Kilmeade is waiting in the hallway.
Outstanding.
He wants to get on. So
Let's bring Brian Kilmeade in.
Got to get him on the air. Andrew, thank you so much. How can people communicate with you?
You can communicate with me by email is the best way to do it. Email me, folks, at crockera@otc.edu. I'd love to answer more questions about the pardon. Maybe I'll come in and yell at Steve some more.